When you hear the name H.G. Wells, what comes to mind? Probably time machines, right? We're invisible men. But Wells wasn't just a science fiction pioneer. Nope. He was a political philosopher with a really radical, super detailed plan for humanity's future. He actually called it his finished statement on the way the world ought to be ordered. So what in the world was in this blueprint for a world revolution? Let's dive in and find out.
All right, so here's how we're going to break down Wells's audacious proposal. We're going to look at it in 5 key parts. First, we'll start with his diagnosis of a world in crisis. Then, we'll get into his solution, which he called the open conspiracy, and the actual blueprint for his scientific world government. After that, we'll explore the main obstacle he saw, which was tradition, and we'll wrap up with the new modern creed he believed was absolutely necessary to make it all happen.
So, first things first, what was the problem Wells was even trying to solve? Well, he looked around at the world in the early 20th century and he saw this massive, dangerous disconnect. On one hand, humanity was making these incredible leaps in science and technology. But on the other hand, our social and political ideas were, to put it mildly, dangerously stuck in the past.
And this gets to the first part of the crisis he saw. The world was shrinking, fast. For the first time ever, thanks to things like railways, steamships, and the telegraph, the distance between countries was just collapsing. As well as put it, all of a sudden, everyone had become next-door neighbors.
And it wasn't just that. Scientific progress meant that for the first time in all of human history, we actually had the power to overcome scarcity. We were entering a world of potential plenty, a world where backbreaking toil wasn't a given anymore. And yet, and this is the crazy part, despite all this potential, most people were still living lives of hardship and just not having enough.
This quote just nails the heart of the crisis. Wells argued our moral compass hadn't caught up with our technological horsepower. Our customs, especially this fierce patriotism and nationalism, were dangerously out of date. You know, in a world with powerful new weapons where everyone's your neighbor, those old loyalties weren't just quaint, they were a recipe for absolute catastrophe.
So if that's the problem, what was Wells's big solution? He called it the open conspiracy. And that word open is so important here. This was not some secret plot being hatched in a dark room. No. This was meant to be a public, global movement of intelligent people who could see the writing on the wall.
And here's his definition of it. The goal was to replace what he called the patchwork of governments and all their endless fighting with a single, unified world civilization. It was a conscious effort to grab the steering wheel of human destiny and reorganize society on a global, rational scale.
So how would this actually work? Wells saw it happening in 3 stages. First, it starts inside your own head, a mental protest, where you just realize how absurd the old system is. Then, those people find each other, they get together and they form a creative resistance. And finally, that group gets down to the real work, the practical, constructive job of actually reorganizing the world.
Okay, so what would this new world order actually look like? This is where we get into the blueprint of Wells's vision. He called it a scientific world commonweal, and commonweal just means a state that's run for the common good. This was his detailed plan for a brand new kind of global government.
Here it is, in his own words. This was the ultimate goal, a single world state. But notice, it's not just about preventing war, it's about getting ahead of the problem, proactively controlling the forces, whether they're economic, biological, or moral, that lead to conflict in the first place.
And the level of control he was talking about was immense. He imagined a technocratic world directorate that would manage the absolute fundamentals of our civilization: food production, global finance, transportation, communication. And here's the most controversial part. It would even have control over the drift and expansion of population.
This gets right to the economic heart of his plan, and it was truly radical. He was calling for taking credit and key industries completely out of private hands. This wasn't just a little tweak. It was a direct call to replace individual profit-seeking with a global collectivist authority. And that idea, as you can imagine, stands in stark contrast to our ideals of personal liberty and national sovereignty. Now, a plan this revolutionary was obviously going to face some huge resistance. But for Wells, the main enemy wasn't a specific person or even a country. It was the powerful, deadening weight of tradition itself. The real opposition, the way Wells saw it, was this tangled web of old habits and powerful people. We're talking about military leaders, national politicians, diplomats, all the official patriots whose power and prestige are completely tied up in the old, divided world. In a unified world, their jobs might become obsolete, So of course they have a huge vested interest in keeping things just the way they are.
And right here, you can see the fundamental clash in how people think. On one side, you've got the patriot. Their loyalty is to a specific flag, a specific country. They think in terms of separation. But on the other side, you have the open conspirator. Their loyalty, it's to all of humanity and to the future. They're trying to create a totally new, global way of thinking.
So that brings us to the final and maybe the most profound part of Wells's whole vision. To overcome the powerful pull of tradition, he said you need more than just a good plan. You need a new kind of personal commitment, what he called a modernized religious impulse.
See, Wells believed that we humans have this deep need for purpose, a need that religion has historically filled. So he proposed we take that basic impulse, strip away all the old dogmas and superstitions, and redirect it. The new religion would be a total, complete devotion of your life to the collective future and destiny of the human species.
And this is the ultimate price of admission for the open conspiracy. It's not about just agreeing with the ideas. It's not about what you believe. It's about the complete subordination of yourself. The very first, most important step is the act of giving your individual life over to this greater collective project for all of humanity.
You know, Wells wrote all this nearly a century ago, but his questions feel incredibly relevant right now. As we face our own huge global crises, from climate change to pandemics, his blueprint kind of forces us to ask ourselves, what is the right balance between our own personal lives and our collective responsibility to the human race? What are we really willing to give?